Ever been abandoned with nothing but a broken-down cabin and 4 sheep? Watch how Savannah turns her father's cruel parting words, "Figure it out," into an unexpected journey of resilience and love. In just minutes, you'll see how rock bottom became the foundation for something beautiful. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories that will break your heart and rebuild it stronger. The August sun beat down mercilessly on the Colorado plains as Savannah Moore stood in the overgrown driveway, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, dust already settling on her worn jeans. At 23, her face still held a youthful softness, but her hazel eyes reflected a wariness beyond her years. She watched in disbelief as her father, Richard, a tall man with weathered skin and permanent frown lines, tossed her duffel bag onto the cracked earth beside her. "Dad, you can't be serious," Savannah said, her voice catching. "You're just leaving me here?" Richard gestured dismissively at the dilapidated ranch house behind them. Paint peeled from its wooden siding, and several roof shingles lay scattered on the ground. A broken windmill creaked in the distance, and beyond that, nothing but miles of drought-stricken pasture. "This is what's left of your grandmother's place," he said flatly. "I've been holding on to it for years, paying the property taxes. Now it's your problem." Savannah's eyes welled with tears. "I have an apartment in Denver. I have a job. I can't just—" "Got laid off, didn't you?" Richard interrupted, checking his watch impatiently. "That fancy marketing degree didn't get you very far. Besides, you're always talking about finding yourself and connecting with nature. Well, here's your chance." A small bleating sound drew Savannah's attention to a modest pen beside the barn where 4 sheep huddled together, looking as lost as she felt. "Those are yours too," Richard said. "Old man Guthrie down the road was going to slaughter them. Figured they might be worth something to you." "For sheep?" Savannah laughed incredulously. "And what am I supposed to do with 4 sheep?" Richard shrugged as he walked back to his pickup truck. "Figure it out. This is all you're getting." "Mom would have never let you do this," Savannah said, her voice hardening. Richard paused, his hand on the truck door. For a moment, something like guilt flickered across his face, but it vanished quickly. "Your mother's been gone 8 years. Cancer took her, and the medical bills took everything else. I've been treading water ever since." He slid into the driver's seat. "I'm moving to Arizona with Linda, starting fresh. So you're dumping me here because your girlfriend doesn't want me around?" Savannah's voice cracked with anger and hurt. "I'm giving you what I can," Richard replied, starting the engine. "There's a generator in the shed, should work. Well, water's still good. Property's paid off. You're luckier than most." Savannah stepped toward the truck, desperation etching her features. "Dad, please. I can find another job in Denver." "I can. This is your inheritance, Savannah. Take it or leave it." His eyes, so similar to her own, remained cold. "You always said you wanted something real, not that corporate rat race. Well, this is as real as it gets." He shifted into reverse. "There's a town about 20 miles east. Not much there, but enough to get by." Savannah stood frozen as the truck pulled away, dust billowing around her. Richard didn't look back, not even once. The sound of tires on gravel faded, leaving her in a silence so profound she could hear her own heartbeat. She turned slowly to face the ramshackle house, her inheritance. A sob rose in her throat as she sank to her knees beside her duffel bag, the cruel finality of her father's words echoing in her mind. "Figure it out. This is all you're getting." Behind her, one of the sheep bleated softly, as if in sympathy. The first week at the ranch passed in a blur of tears and disbelief. Savannah moved through the small cabin like a ghost, taking inventory of her meager inheritance. The main room held a sagging couch with faded floral upholstery, a rickety wooden table with 2 mismatched chairs, and a potbelly stove that looked like it hadn't been lit in years. A narrow hallway led to a single bedroom with a metal-framed bed and a bare mattress that smelled of dust and disuse. The bathroom fixtures were ancient, a clawfoot tub with rust stains, a toilet that required jiggling the handle after each flush, and a sink with unpredictable water pressure. At least the well still worked, though the water had a mineral taste that made her wrinkle her nose. "Hello," Savannah called out on her 3rd day, just to hear a human voice. Her own words echoed back, mocking her isolation. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional bleat from the sheep or the constant Colorado wind that whistled through the poorly sealed windows. At night, the darkness was absolute. Without electricity, the generator Richard mentioned had fuel for only a few hours. Savannah relied on candles and a battery-powered lantern she found in a kitchen drawer. The stars blazed overhead with an intensity she had never witnessed in Denver, but their beauty offered little comfort. "I can't do this," she whispered into her pillow, clutching her phone with its steadily diminishing battery and 0 bars of service. "I can't live like this." But each morning, she forced herself to rise with the sun. The sheep needed feeding, and she was all they had. Their names came to her gradually. Marigold, the oldest ewe with a patch of yellow-tinged wool on her forehead. Pepper, the smallest with black speckles on her face. Daisy, pure white and gentle-eyed. And Winston, the only ram, with impressive curled horns and a stubborn temperament. "You guys don't make this easy, do you?" Savannah muttered as Winston butted against the makeshift gate she'd constructed from scrap wood. The original pen had been falling apart, and fixing it had consumed an entire day. By the end of the second week, her hands were blistered from unfamiliar labor. She'd cleared enough debris from the yard to create a path from the house to the barn. Inside the barn, she discovered old farming tools, some still usable, and a stack of neglected lumber that might come in handy for repairs. The days stretched endlessly, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun. Her only company was the distant rumble of the occasional truck on the highway, miles away, a sound that made her heart leap with longing for human connection. One afternoon, desperate for interaction, Savannah hiked to the property line, following a fence that had collapsed in several places. She spotted a farmhouse in the distance, but couldn't summon the courage to approach strangers. Not yet, not in her current state of dishevelment and despair. "Tomorrow," she promised herself, turning back as the sky darkened with approaching storm clouds. "Tomorrow I'll drive into town." But her ancient Toyota refused to start the next morning, the battery dead after sitting and used for weeks. As rain pelted the tin roof that night, Savannah sat at the kitchen table by candlelight, her grandmother's faded recipe box open before her, one of the few personal items left in the house. Inside, written in a careful hand on yellowed index cards, were instructions for simple country living, bread recipes, home remedies, seasonal planting guides. "What would you do, Grandma?" Savannah whispered, running her fingers over the handwriting of a woman she'd barely known. "How did you survive out here, all alone in the dust?" The house creaked and settled around her, offering no answers, just the relentless reminder of her solitude and the harsh reality of her new life. September brought cooler evenings and spectacular sunsets that painted the Colorado sky in shades of amber and crimson. Savannah had fallen into a routine of sorts, caring for the sheep, making small repairs to the cabin, and rationing her dwindling supplies. She'd managed to jumpstart her car using an old set of cables found in the barn and had made 2 nerve-wracking trips to the nearest town, Clearwater, population 857 according to the weather-beaten welcome sign. The general store's proprietor, a gray-haired woman named Maggie, had eyed her with equal parts curiosity and suspicion. "More place, isn't it?" she'd asked, ringing up Savannah's modest purchases. "Thought that land was abandoned." "It was my grandmother's," Savannah had replied quietly. "I'm fixing it up." The lie had felt easier than explaining her father's abandonment. Tonight, however, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder rolled across the plains, Savannah huddled beneath a quilt on the couch, a flashlight clutched in one hand. The storm had knocked out the generator, plunging the cabin into darkness. Wind howled through the eaves, and somewhere in the distance, a branch crashed to the ground. "Just a storm," Savannah whispered to herself, flinching at another crack of thunder. "It'll pass." A different sound cut through the rain, a high-pitched whine followed by a frantic scratching at the front door. Savannah froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. The nearest neighbor was over a mile away. Who would be at her door in this weather? The scratching continued, more desperate now, accompanied by a plaintive whimper. Clutching the flashlight like a weapon, Savannah approached the door. "Hello," she called, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Who's there?" Another whimper answered her. Taking a deep breath, Savannah cracked open the door. The beam of her flashlight revealed not an intruder, but a dog. A border collie, soaked to the skin, mud-splattered and shivering violently. One ear stood upright while the other flopped forward, giving him a perpetually quizzical expression. Dark, intelligent eyes looked up at her with what seemed like pleading. "Oh my God," Savannah gasped, swinging the door wider. "Where did you come from?" The dog hesitated only briefly before darting inside, bringing with him the smell of wet fur and a spray of rainwater as he shook vigorously. "Hey, easy," Savannah protested, but there was no real annoyance in her voice. It had been weeks since she'd spoken to anyone, or anything, that responded. The dog paced a tight circle before settling by the cold wood stove, his eyes never leaving Savannah's face. "You don't have a collar," she observed, kneeling beside him. "Are you lost?" Cautiously, she extended her hand. The dog sniffed her fingers, then pressed his muzzle against her palm, a gesture of such trust that Savannah felt tears spring to her eyes. "You're not afraid of me at all, are you?" she whispered, running her fingers through his damp fur. "Are you hungry?" "I don't have dog food, but I've got some leftover stew." As if understanding her words, the dog's tail thumped against the floorboards. That night, the dog slept at the foot of Savannah's bed, his steady breathing a counterpoint to the storm that continued to rage outside. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, Savannah felt something other than despair, a fragile connection, a sense of being needed. "If no one comes looking for you," she told the dog as dawn broke and the storm finally passed, "I think I'll call you Shadow, because you followed me home through the dark." Shadow, as if approving his new name, licked her hand and trotted to the door, clearly ready to explore his new territory. Over the next few days, it became apparent that Shadow was no ordinary stray. He circled the sheep with purpose, responding instinctively to Savannah's commands despite her never having worked with a herding dog before. "Come by," she called experimentally, having read the term in one of her grandmother's old farming journals. Shadow immediately moved clockwise around the small flock, guiding them toward the pen. "How do you know what to do?" Savannah marveled, scratching behind his ears as the sheep settled into their enclosure. "Were you a ranch dog before?" Shadow offered no clues about his past, but his presence transformed Savannah's days. Mornings began with his cold nose pressed against her cheek. Evenings ended with his warm weight beside her on the couch as she read by lamplight. Most importantly, the crushing silence was gone, replaced by paws padding across wooden floors and the occasional bark when rabbits ventured too close to the garden she'd begun to clear. "We're quite the team, aren't we?" Savannah said one evening, watching Shadow herd the sheep with effortless precision. For the first time since her father had driven away, she smiled. A genuine smile that reached her eyes and eased, just slightly, the knot of loneliness in her chest. October arrived with frost-tinged mornings and the realization that winter would soon test Savannah's resilience in ways she hadn't yet imagined. The cabin's roof leaked in 3 places, the windows rattled with every gust of wind, and the woodpile was dangerously low. Each problem demanded immediate attention and resources she didn't have. "Shadow, we need to figure this out," Savannah said one morning, sitting cross-legged on the porch steps with a notepad. The border collie tilted his head attentively. "Dad was right about one thing. I've got these sheep. There has to be something I can do with them besides just keeping them alive." She flipped through one of the farming magazines she'd found in a kitchen drawer, pausing at an article about small-scale fiber production. The accompanying photos showed hand-spun yarn in vibrant colors. "That's it," she murmured, an idea forming. "They're wool. People pay good money for handmade things these days." The next day, Savannah drove to Clearwater's library, a small brick building with spotty internet access but a surprisingly robust agricultural section. She returned with an armful of books on sheep care, wool processing, and spinning techniques. Learning to shear proved challenging. Savannah's first attempt with Marigold left the sheep looking patchy and irritated, with several small nicks that made Savannah cry with guilt. "I'm sorry, girl," she whispered, applying antiseptic. "I promise I'll get better." Washing the wool in her bathtub was messy work that left the bathroom smelling distinctly of lanolin. Carding, the process of aligning the fibers before spinning, gave her blisters until her hands toughened. The drop spindle she crafted from an old toy wheel and a dowel rod produced uneven yarn at first, thick in some places and dangerously thin in others. "This is useless," Savannah groaned after her 5th failed attempt, throwing the spindle across the room in frustration. Shadow retrieved it and placed it gently in her lap, his eyes seeming to encourage her to try again. Hours turned into days, days into weeks. Gradually, the yarn improved. Savannah discovered that Daisy's wool was the softest, perfect for items worn close to the skin, while Winston's coarser fibers were ideal for durable outerwear. She experimented with natural dyes made from plants found on the property. Goldenrod produced sunny yellows. Wild grapes yielded soft purples. Her first finished product was a simple scarf in varying shades of blue, dyed with indigo purchased with her dwindling savings. Despite its imperfections, she felt an unfamiliar surge of pride as she wrapped it around her neck. What do you think, Shadow? Ready to try selling it? The Clearwater Farmers Market was held on Saturday mornings in the town square. With trembling hands, Savannah set up a small table borrowed from the cabin. Her display was modest: 5 skeins of yarn and 3 finished scarves arranged on a clean tablecloth. A handwritten sign read, "More Ranch Handspun Wool." The first hour passed with browsers, but no buyers. Savannah's confidence wavered as neighboring vendors with professional setups and diverse products attracted steady customers. "First market?" asked an elderly woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun, pausing at Savannah's table. "Is it that obvious?" Savannah replied with a nervous laugh. The woman, who introduced herself as Eleanor, picked up a skein of deep burgundy yarn, running experienced fingers over the fibers. "This is good work, especially for a beginner. Did you use pokeberries for this color?" "Yes," Savannah said, surprised. "With a bit of vinegar as a mordant." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "I used to spin myself before arthritis got the better of my hands." "How much?" $15, Savannah said, having researched market rates at the library. When Eleanor didn't flinch at the price, she added, "But I could do 12 for you." "I'll take it at 15, Eleanor said firmly, "and I'll take that cream-colored skein too. No discount. Good work deserves fair payment." By the end of the market, Savannah had sold all but 1 scarf and 2 skeins of yarn. Her total earnings, $87, felt like a fortune. More valuable than the money, however, were the connections she'd made. Eleanor had introduced her to other vendors: a soap maker interested in collaborating on wool-felted soap covers, a retired carpenter willing to repair her roof in exchange for a custom sweater for his daughter's birthday. Driving home with Shadow in the passenger seat, Savannah felt a flutter of hope stir in her chest. The ranch was still run down, her future uncertain, but for the first time, she could envision a path forward, one spun from the very inheritance her father had mockingly left her. "We're going to make it, Shadow," she said, reaching over to scratch behind his ears. "One day at a time, one skein at a time." The border collie, as if in agreement, gave a contented sigh and rested his muzzle on her thigh, a warm anchor in her still precarious world. As November's chill settled over the Colorado landscape, Savannah established a Wednesday ritual. Each week, she would wake before dawn, bundle up against the cold, and drive her temperamental Toyota into Clearwater. Shadow always rode shotgun, his breath fogging the passenger window as he watched the world pass by. The Clearwater Public Library was a single-story brick building with wide steps and a book drop that creaked when opened. It wasn't much compared to Denver's Grand Central Library, but to Savannah, it had become a lifeline, a source of both practical knowledge and much-needed escape. "Good morning, Ms. Moore," greeted Harriet Wilson, the head librarian, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked auburn hair and reading glasses that hung from a beaded chain. "I set aside that book on sustainable pasture management you requested from the county extension." "Thank you," Savannah replied, warming her hands against a paper cup of coffee from the diner across the street. "And please, it's just Savannah." "Savannah, then," Harriet said with a smile. "Shadow will have to stay tethered outside, as usual." "Of course." Savannah knelt to address her companion. "I won't be long, boy. Be good." The border collie settled obediently by the bike rack, watching her with intelligent eyes that seemed to understand the importance of their weekly mission. Inside, Savannah headed straight for her usual corner table, already stacked with books she'd been working through: The Sheep Raiser's Manual, Regenerative Farming for Beginners, Small Business Accounting Basics, and Colorado Native Plants for Natural Dye. Each volume bore the marks of her study: post-it notes protruding from important pages, corners folded down despite Harriet's gentle admonishments, and occasional smudges of dirt from hands that could never quite come clean after ranch work. You know, you could just check these out, Harriet commented, placing the requested book on top of Savannah's stack. Savannah shook her head. My car heater's unreliable. I'd worry about damaging them. Besides, she glanced around the quiet space. I like it here. What she didn't say was that the library represented civilization, normalcy, a few precious hours each week when she wasn't the strange woman trying to survive alone on a derelict ranch. Today, she opened a worn copy of Rural Entrepreneurship, Creating Sustainable Income from Small Acreage. The chapter on value-added products caught her attention, with its discussion of transforming raw materials like wool into higher-priced finished goods. Excuse me, said a male voice, interrupting her concentration. Savannah looked up to see a man about her age, with dark-rimmed glasses and a name tag identifying him as Drew, library assistant. Sorry to bother you, he continued, but I noticed your reading choices. Are you planning to start a farm business? I'm trying to resurrect one, actually, Savannah replied, surprising herself with her openness. My grandmother's place outside town. It's seen better days. Drew nodded thoughtfully. You might be interested in this, then? He placed a flyer on the table. The community college is offering a 6-week course on agricultural entrepreneurship starting in January. It's one evening a week, and they offer scholarships for local producers. Savannah scanned the information, noting the application deadline, just 2 weeks away. The tuition fee made her wince. Even with a scholarship, it would strain her meager budget. Thank you, she said, folding the flyer carefully. I'll think about it. For what it's worth, Drew added, they're specifically looking for innovative approaches to traditional farming. Your hand-spun yarn at the market? That would qualify. You've seen my yarn? Drew smiled. My mom bought your blue scarf. She hasn't stopped talking about how soft it is. A flush of pride warmed Savannah's cheeks. That's really nice to hear. After Drew moved on to help another patron, Savannah returned to her reading with renewed determination. She took careful notes in a composition book, her handwriting growing more confident with each page. Beside her notes, she sketched plans for expanding her flock, diagrams of an improved pasture rotation system, and calculations for wool production costs versus potential profits. The hours passed quickly. When the library's clock chimed 3, Savannah reluctantly gathered her notes. Outside, Shadow greeted her with an enthusiastic wag that shook his entire body. I know, buddy. I missed you too. She knelt to ruffle his fur, then pulled the community college flyer from her pocket. What do you think? Should we invest in my education? Shadow's bark seemed affirmative. That evening, as snow began to fall in gentle flurries, Savannah sat at her grandmother's kitchen table, the scholarship application spread before her. The essay question asked about her vision for contributing to Colorado's agricultural community. Her pen hovered over the paper for a long moment before she began to write, her words hesitant at first, then flowing with increasing confidence. The Moore Ranch has been in my family for 3 generations. Though it has fallen into disrepair, I believe it can once again become a productive part of our local economy. My vision combines traditional shepherding with modern sustainability practices to create unique, handcrafted wool products while preserving Colorado's ranching heritage. Outside, the wind carried the distant howl of coyotes. Inside, warmed by the wood stove and Shadow's steady presence at her feet, Savannah wrote long into the night, dirt still embedded beneath her fingernails, but her mind filled with growing possibilities. The county fair arrived in late May, transforming the Clearwater Fairgrounds into a bustling showcase of rural Colorado life. Savannah hadn't planned to attend. There was always too much work at the ranch, but Eleanor had insisted she enter her hand-spun yarn in the textile competition. You've got a gift, girl, Eleanor had said firmly. Time to let others see it. Now, standing beside her modest display in the crafts pavilion, Savannah smoothed her sundress nervously. It was the first time in nearly a year she'd worn anything but work clothes, and she felt oddly exposed without her usual layers of flannel and denim. Your yarn has wonderful consistency, remarked one of the judges, a woman with silver hair and nimble fingers that tested the strength of Savannah's midnight blue skein. Natural dyes? Yes, ma'am, Savannah replied. Indigo primarily, with some elderberry to deepen the tone. The judge nodded approvingly before moving on to the next entry. Savannah exhaled slowly, then slipped away from her display. The judging wouldn't be completed for hours, and the early summer heat inside the pavilion was stifling. Outside, she wandered through rows of livestock pens, instinctively drawn to the sheep exhibition. She missed Shadow, who'd been left at home due to the fair's strict rules about non-competing animals, but the familiar smell of lanolin and hay was comforting. "That one's got better conformation than yours," said a little girl beside her, pointing to a Suffolk ewe. The child couldn't have been more than 7, with copper-colored braids and a smattering of freckles across her nose. Savannah smiled. "You're right. My Pepper's legs aren't nearly as straight. You have sheep?" The girl's eyes widened with interest. 4 of them, though Marigold's expecting lambs any day now, so soon there might be more. "We have 26, the girl announced proudly. "Daddy says that's too many, but I know all their names." "June," a deep voice called from several pens down. "What did I tell you about wandering off?" A man in his mid-30s approached, his brow furrowed with concern. Tall and broad-shouldered, he had the weathered look of someone who spent most days outdoors. His dark hair was cut short, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a face that seemed accustomed to smiling, though his expression now was one of parental exasperation. "I wasn't wandering, Daddy," the girl, June, protested. "I was talking to the sheep lady." The man's eyes shifted to Savannah, his expression softening into apologetic embarrassment. "I'm sorry if she was bothering you." "Not at all," Savannah assured him. "She was educating me about proper sheep conformation." This drew a reluctant smile from him. "Sounds like June. She absorbs everything the vet tells us." "I'm Wesley Parker," he added, extending a calloused hand. "Savannah Moore." His handshake was firm but gentle. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Moore Ranch, out on County Line Road." Savannah nodded, surprised. "You know it." "I drive past it taking June to her piano lessons in Glendale. Noticed someone had fixed up the place a bit." "That was you." "Me and a very determined border collie," Savannah confirmed. Wesley chuckled, a warm sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "We've got 2 healers ourselves. Can't run a ranch without good dogs." "Are you showing sheep today?" Savannah asked, nodding toward the exhibition area. "June is. Her 4-H project." A shadow passed briefly over his features. "Her mother always handled the fair entries. I'm still learning the ropes." The mention of June's mother, and the subtle absence in his words, wasn't lost on Savannah. Before she could respond, the loudspeaker crackled with an announcement about the junior livestock judging. "That's us," Wesley said, placing a protective hand on June's shoulder. "It was nice meeting you, Savannah Moore." "Good luck, June," Savannah called as they walked away. The little girl turned to wave, her smile revealing a missing front tooth. Later, as the afternoon heat began to wane, Savannah found herself at the pie auction, drawn by the scent of cinnamon and baked fruit. She hadn't intended to bid. Her budget was still tight despite growing yarn sales, but stood watching as colorful desserts fetched surprising sums for the 4-H scholarship fund. The sheep lady, June, appeared at her elbow, clutching a blue ribbon. "Look what I won. First place." "Congratulations," Savannah exclaimed, genuinely impressed. "It's not best in show," June clarified seriously, "but Daddy says it's outstanding for my first year." "Your daddy's right," Savannah agreed, looking up to find Wesley approaching with 2 paper cups. "Lemonade," he explained, offering one to Savannah. "It's hot as blazes in here." The gesture was simple but unexpectedly touching. "Thank you," she said, accepting the cup gratefully. "Did you see my ribbon?" June asked him. "I sure did, Pumpkin. Why don't you go show Miss Eleanor? She's over by the quilt display." As June scampered off, Wesley turned to Savannah with a hint of shyness that seemed at odds with his sturdy presence. "I hope you don't mind the lemonade." June wouldn't stop talking about the nice sheep lady. "It's perfect," Savannah assured him. "And congratulations on June's win." "Thanks." He hesitated, then added, "I saw your yarn won a ribbon too. Red, right?" Savannah blinked in surprise. "You saw that? Hard to miss the display with Moore Ranch right there on the sign." He smiled, revealing a slight dimple in his right cheek. "Folks around here have noticed what you're doing with that place. It takes guts to tackle a project like that alone." For a moment, Savannah was transported back to her first day at the ranch, watching her father's truck disappear in a cloud of dust. Not entirely by choice, she admitted. Rarely is. Something in Wesley's tone suggested he understood more than she'd said. "My late wife used to say that the best things in life arrive in packages we didn't order." Their eyes met briefly, a moment of shared recognition that neither loss nor hardship had defined them completely. From across the room, June waved enthusiastically, her ribbon fluttering like a victory flag. "I should probably rescue Eleanor from my daughter's sheep statistics," Wesley said with a rueful smile. "It was really nice talking with you, Savannah." "You too," she replied, surprised to find she genuinely meant it. As Wesley walked away, Savannah felt something shift inside her, a door opening to possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider during months of survival and solitude. Summer stretched into autumn, bringing with it a new rhythm to Savannah's days. What had begun as occasional visits, Wesley and June stopping by the ranch to drop off a borrowed book on sheep breeding or to see the lambs Marigold had delivered in June, had evolved into a comfortable routine. "Savannah." June's voice rang out across the yard as Wesley's blue pickup pulled up the drive one crisp October Saturday. The little girl tumbled out before the truck had fully stopped, racing toward the barn where Savannah was spreading fresh straw. "Careful, June bug," Savannah cautioned, setting aside her pitchfork to catch the whirlwind of energy that collided with her legs. "The ground's slippery from yesterday's rain. Did you make the special soap yet? The one with lanolin?" June's face tilted up expectantly, freckles standing out against skin tanned from summer sunshine. "Just finished curing yesterday," Savannah confirmed. "Want to help me wrap them?" June nodded eagerly, already heading toward the cabin. Savannah turned to find Wesley leaning against the barn door, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Sorry to ambush you first thing," he said, pushing away from the doorframe to help gather her tools. "She's been talking about soap making all week." "I don't mind," Savannah replied honestly. "It's nice having someone excited about the things I'm learning." Wesley's hand brushed hers as they both reached for the feed scoop, a brief moment of contact that sent an unexpected warmth through her fingers. She stepped back slightly, still unaccustomed to the simple physical presence of others after her months of isolation. "We brought lunch," Wesley said, seeming not to notice her momentary awkwardness. "June insisted on making the sandwiches herself, so I apologize in advance for any unusual combinations." "I'm sure they'll be delicious," Savannah assured him. "Let me just finish up here." Inside the cabin, which looked less like a dilapidated shack these days and more like a modest but cared-for home, June had already set herself up at the kitchen table, carefully examining the bars of pale yellow soap. "These smell like honey," she observed, inhaling deeply. "That's because there is honey in them," Savannah explained, washing her hands at the sink. "From Eleanor's bees. The lanolin comes from our sheep, and the oatmeal helps make it gentle for sensitive skin." Wesley unpacked a wicker basket, laying out sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, a jar of homemade pickles, and 3 slices of apple pie in a covered dish. "Quite the cottage industry you've built here," he remarked, glancing around at the drying herbs hanging from the ceiling beams and the neat rows of yarn skeins arranged by color on an old bookshelf. "Trying to be, anyway," Savannah said. "The community college course helped a lot with the business side. I'm actually shipping orders to 3 different states now." Pride colored her voice, a feeling that still surprised her whenever it surfaced. The small successes of the past year, repairing the roof, expanding the flock to 8 sheep, launching an online store for her yarn and soap, had gradually rebuilt something in her that had been shattered the day her father drove away. "Can I cut the paper for the soap wrappers?" June asked, already reaching for the scissors and decorative paper Savannah kept in a drawer for just this purpose. "Sure, but let's eat first," Savannah replied, setting plates on the table. "Your dad worked hard making this lunch." June rolled her eyes in a gesture so reminiscent of her father that Savannah had to suppress a smile. "Daddy didn't make anything except the pie. Mrs. Harmon from church gave it to him because she thinks he's handsome." Wesley nearly choked on his water. "June Parker, that is not." He stopped, his face flushing slightly. "Mrs. Harmon is just being neighborly. She told Aunt Beth that you have kind eyes and strong hands." June continued matter-of-factly, biting into her sandwich. "I heard them talking." Savannah bit her lip to keep from laughing at Wesley's obvious discomfort. "Well, I think we can all agree the pie looks delicious, regardless of the motivation behind it." Wesley shot her a grateful look, and the conversation shifted to safer territory. June's school project on Colorado wildlife, the farmer's market schedule for the holiday season, Shadow's impressive herding of the expanded flock. After lunch, June settled at the table with her soap wrapping project while Wesley helped Savannah install weather stripping around the kitchen windows, a task she'd been putting off as colder weather approached. "You're good with her," Wesley said quietly as they worked, nodding toward June, who was humming to herself as she carefully measured and cut paper. Most people don't know how to talk to kids who've lost a parent. They either ignore it completely or treat them like they might break. Savannah paused, considering her words carefully. "I think, when you've experienced loss yourself, you recognize that it becomes part of who you are. Not the only part, but still important." Wesley's hands stilled on the window frame. "Your mother?" he guessed. "Yes," Savannah nodded. "Cancer, when I was 15. And my father." She hesitated, still reluctant to share the full truth of her abandonment. "We're estranged." Wesley didn't press for details, a kindness she appreciated. Instead, he simply handed her another strip of weather stripping, his fingers lingering against hers for a moment longer than necessary. "June asked if you could teach her to spin," he said after a comfortable silence. "I told her it would depend on your schedule." "I'd love to," Savannah replied, surprised by how much she meant it. "Maybe Sunday afternoons? After church. That would be perfect." And so the pattern of their lives continued to intertwine. Sunday afternoons became spinning lessons, with June's small hands gradually gaining confidence on the drop spindle Savannah had carved especially for her. Wednesdays occasionally found Wesley helping with heavier ranch tasks, mending fences, clearing a fallen tree, reinforcing the barn roof before winter snows. December arrived with a heavy snowfall that transformed the landscape into a glittering wonderland. June convinced them to cut a small pine tree from Wesley's property, and an evening was spent decorating it with handmade ornaments. Tiny wool sheep that June had helped needle felt, pine cones dipped in glitter, paper stars from one of Savannah's grandmother's old pattern books. As they worked, June regaled Savannah with stories of Christmases past, memories of her mother woven through her narratives without pain, just matter-of-fact remembrance. Wesley watched them from across the room, his expression a complex mixture of gratitude and something deeper that Savannah wasn't quite ready to name. Later, after June had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from excitement and hot chocolate, Wesley helped Savannah wash the dishes in comfortable silence. "Thank you," he said finally, drying a mug with careful attention. "For giving her this. For helping her be a little girl again." Savannah looked at June's sleeping form, copper braids splayed across the cushion, shadow curled protectively at her feet. "She's given me something too," she admitted softly. "A reason to make this place more than just a shelter. To make it a home." Wesley's hand found hers in the soapy water, fingers interlacing with quiet certainty. Neither spoke, but as they stood together in the warm kitchen with the snow falling silently outside, Savannah realized that roots could grow even in soil once thought barren, and trust, like the tiny seedlings in her newly planted garden, needed only care and patience to flourish. January arrived with bone-chilling winds that swept across the plains, piling snowdrifts against the north side of the cabin. On the coldest nights, Savannah would add extra logs to the wood stove, grateful for the cord of seasoned oak Wesley had helped her split and stack the previous autumn. "You're brooding again," Wesley observed one Sunday afternoon, finding her at the kitchen window, staring out at the white landscape. June was in the living room, practicing her spinning while Shadow watched with attentive eyes. "Just thinking," Savannah corrected, smiling despite herself. In the 10 months since they'd met at the county fair, she'd grown accustomed to his quiet perception, the way he could read the subtle shifts in her mood. Wesley leaned against the counter beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his flannel-clad shoulder. "Penny for your thoughts?" "I was just wondering what my grandmother would think," Savannah admitted. "About the ranch, what I've done with it. Whether she'd approve." The woman who kept every single recipe and garden note meticulously organized? Who documented 30 years of flock breeding in those ledgers you found? Wesley raised an eyebrow. "I'd say she'd be mighty proud to see her granddaughter carrying on the tradition, putting her own stamp on things." Savannah nodded, absently running her fingertips over the worn edge of the countertop. "I wish I'd known her better. Dad never wanted to visit after she got sick." It was the most she'd shared about her father since briefly mentioning their estrangement months ago. Wesley didn't immediately respond, just shifted slightly closer, his shoulder now touching hers, a solid presence, offering support without pressure. Some people can't face hard things, he said finally. After Caroline, after June's mom died, her parents couldn't bear to visit us. Too many memories, they said. I understood, but June needed them, Savannah finished softly. Yeah, Wesley's voice held old pain, carefully managed but not forgotten. People leave, even when they're still right there. It's not always about the ones who get left behind. The simple truth of his words loosened something in Savannah's chest that had been tight for a very long time. Thank you, she whispered, not entirely sure what she was thanking him for, but feeling it deeply nonetheless. Their relationship had developed with the unhurried pace of a carefully tended garden. Friendship had deepened into something more, expressed in small gestures. Wesley checking on her sheep during a blizzard when Shadow had injured his paw. Savannah preparing freezer meals when he had to travel to a livestock auction in Denver. The three of them gathering around her table for Sunday dinners that increasingly felt like family. Have dinner with me, Wesley said suddenly. Just us. Next Friday. Savannah turned to face him, surprised. Like a date. A faint flush colored his cheeks above his beard. Exactly like a date. June can stay with my sister Beth. I'd like to take you somewhere nice, without sheep or soap making or emergency fence repairs. Savannah felt her own cheeks warm. I'd like that too. Friday arrived with unexpected nerves. Savannah found herself standing before the small mirror in her bedroom, scrutinizing her reflection. The emerald green dress, a splurge from her Christmas yarn sales, complemented her eyes, and she'd taken extra care with her hair, letting it fall in loose waves instead of her usual practical braid. What do you think, Shadow? She asked the border collie, who sat watching her preparations with curious eyes. Too much. Shadow thumped his tail in what she chose to interpret as approval. Wesley arrived precisely at 6, his truck freshly washed, wearing dark jeans and a crisp button-down shirt that made him look both familiar and somehow new. His momentary speechlessness when she opened the door told Savannah her efforts had been worthwhile. You look beautiful, he said finally, handing her a small bouquet of winter anemones. I've never seen you in a dress before. It's been a while, Savannah admitted, arranging the flowers in a mason jar. Ranch work doesn't leave much occasion for dressing up. They drove to a restaurant in Glendale, a converted Victorian house with white tablecloths and candles flickering in hurricane lamps. Conversation flowed easily between them, as it always did, but there was a new awareness, an anticipation that made even simple exchanges feel charged with meaning. I have something to confess, Wesley said as they shared a slice of chocolate cake. I drove by your ranch several times before the fair. I'd seen you working in the garden with Shadow. Beth thought I should just stop and introduce myself. But what? Savannah prompted when he hesitated. But I was afraid, he admitted, his honesty disarming. After Caroline died, I focused entirely on June, on keeping the ranch going. The idea of being interested in someone, it felt like a betrayal somehow. And now? Savannah asked softly. Wesley reached across the table to take her hand. Now I think Caroline would be the first to tell me that hearts are meant to heal, to grow, to love again. She always said life was too precious to waste on fear. Something bloomed in Savannah's chest, warm and hopeful. She sounds like she was very wise. She was. His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. She also would have liked you. You're both stubborn as hell. Savannah laughed, the sound bright in the quiet restaurant. I prefer to call it determination. I've noticed, Wesley said, his smile reaching his eyes in the way that always made Savannah's heart beat a little faster. Later, as they walked back to his truck under a canopy of stars, their breath forming clouds in the cold winter air, Wesley stopped suddenly in the middle of the empty sidewalk. Savannah, he said, her name sounding like something precious in his voice. I need you to know that I'm not rushing into this. What I feel for you, it's grown slowly, surely, like something with deep roots. I know, she replied, stepping closer to him. So has what I feel for you. His kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When she responded, wrapping her arms around his neck, he drew her closer, his embrace strong and certain. In that moment, Savannah felt as though all the unexpected turns in her life, even her father's cruel abandonment, had been leading her here, to this man, to this feeling of coming home. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and new possibilities. Wesley proposed on a mild April evening, not with grand gestures, but with quiet sincerity. They stood beside the newly mended barn, the sunset painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, when he took both her hands in his. "Marry me," he said simply. "You, me, June, Shadow, the sheep, all of it together. That's what I want." Savannah's yes was equally straightforward, as natural as breathing. They married in late June in Wesley's pasture, beneath an arch woven with native flowers and decorated with skeins of Savannah's most colorful yarn. June served as both flower girl and ring bearer, solemn with the responsibility and radiant with joy. Shadow, wearing a hand-woven collar for the occasion, stood attentively at Savannah's side. The reception was a community affair. Eleanor and Maggie from the general store, Harriet and Drew from the library, Wesley's sister Beth and her family, neighbors from both ranches, and the growing circle of friends who had become their extended family. As twilight descended and lanterns were lit around the dance floor created from wooden pallets, Wesley pulled Savannah close for their first dance. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. Savannah looked around at the gathering, at June twirling in her flower-sprigged dress, at Shadow accepting treats from admiring guests, at the simple gold band on her finger catching the lantern light, and felt the fullness of the moment, the journey from abandonment to belonging. "Completely," she answered, rising on tiptoe to kiss her husband beneath the stars that had witnessed her solitude and now blessed her joy. 3 years into their marriage, the Moore Parker Ranch had flourished into a thriving enterprise. The original 4 sheep had multiplied to a respectable flock of 32, carefully bred for the quality of their wool. Savannah's yarn business, now operating under the name Prairie Threads, had developed a loyal following both locally and online. Wesley had expanded his cattle operation to include a small but profitable line of grass-fed beef, while June, now 10, had become the youngest member of the county 4-H Leadership Council. It was a crisp September morning when the unfamiliar truck appeared at the end of their long driveway. Savannah was in the dye shed, a converted outbuilding where she created her signature colors, when Shadow's alert bark drew her attention. Wiping her hands on her apron, she stepped outside, squinting against the autumn sunlight. The vehicle moved slowly, hesitantly, as if the driver was uncertain of their welcome. As it drew closer, Savannah felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Though older and more battered, she recognized her father's pickup. "Wesley," she called, her voice sharper than intended. Her husband emerged from the barn, reading her tension immediately. He crossed to stand beside her, his presence steady and reassuring as the truck came to a stop in front of the house. Richard Moore looked considerably older than when Savannah had last seen him. His once robust frame had thinned, and deep lines etched his face. His clothes hung loosely on his body, and his movements as he climbed down from the cab seemed stiff and painful. "Savannah," he said, his voice raspy. He cleared his throat, eyes darting nervously to Wesley, then back to his daughter. "You look well. What are you doing here?" Savannah asked, proud of how level her voice remained despite the storm of emotions churning inside her. Richard gestured vaguely at the ranch, at the freshly painted house, the well-maintained outbuildings, the neat fencing around lush pastures. "Heard about the place. In town. People talking about the Moore Parker Ranch, the hand-spun yarn." He paused. "Didn't know you'd gotten married." "There's a lot you don't know," Savannah replied, feeling Wesley's hand come to rest lightly at the small of her back. Shadow positioned himself between Savannah and Richard, not growling but watchful, sensing the tension in the air. "I'm Wesley Parker," her husband said, extending his free hand. "Savannah's husband." Richard shook it briefly. "Richard Moore." An awkward silence stretched between them until Richard shifted his weight, wincing slightly. "Could we talk inside?" "My back. Long drive from Arizona." Savannah hesitated, then nodded curtly. "The kitchen." Inside, Richard sat at the same table where he had once told Savannah to figure it out. His eyes moved over the transformed space. The cheerful curtains June had helped sew, the shelves lined with canned goods from their garden, the family photos displayed proudly on the walls. "Coffee," Wesley offered, already moving to the stove where the percolator sat ready. "Black." "Thanks," Richard replied, then turned to Savannah, who remained standing, arms crossed. "You've done well for yourself. Better than I expected, truth be told." The backhanded compliment stoked a spark of anger in Savannah's chest. Did you expect me to fail? To come crawling back to you? Richard had the grace to look ashamed. I wasn't thinking clearly back then. After your mother, the bills. Linda seemed like a fresh start. And how did that work out? Savannah asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Richard stared down at his gnarled hands. She left. About a year ago. Took pretty much everything. He looked up, his expression pained. I'm not here to make excuses, Savannah. What I did was wrong. Cruel, even. Wesley set coffee mugs on the table, then quietly withdrew to the living room, giving them privacy while remaining within earshot, a gesture of support that Savannah appreciated deeply. Why are you here, Dad? She asked directly. After 4 years of silence. Richard's fingers tightened around his mug. I'm sick, he said flatly. Cancer. Same as your mother, as it turns out. Ironic, isn't it? The news hit Savannah like a physical blow. Despite everything, despite the abandonment and hurt, this was still her father. The man who had taught her to ride a bike, who had carried her on his shoulders at parades, who had been her hero before grief and bitterness had twisted him into someone unrecognizable. I'm sorry to hear that, she said finally, her voice softer. Doctors give me maybe 6 months. Treatment options are limited and expensive. Richard met her eyes directly for the first time. I've got nothing left, Savannah. No savings, no insurance that covers much. I thought maybe, considering how well you're doing here. Understanding dawned cold and clear. You want money. I need help, Richard corrected, though his eyes slid away from hers. I thought, being family. Savannah laughed, a sharp sound without humor. Family? You left me in a broken-down shack with 4 sheep and told me to figure it out. That's not what family does. I know I don't deserve. You're right. You don't, Savannah interrupted, years of suppressed anger finally finding voice. You don't deserve my help, or my forgiveness, or even my time. Do you have any idea what those first months were like? How scared and alone I felt. If it hadn't been for Shadow showing up, for the community that welcomed me despite being a stranger, I might not have survived. Richard flinched at her words, but didn't argue. You're right, he said quietly. I have no right to ask anything of you. Something in his defeated posture, so unlike the commanding father she remembered, made Savannah's next words catch in her throat. She took a deep breath, remembering Wesley's gentle wisdom. People leave, even when they're still right there. It's not always about the ones who get left behind. Where are you staying? She asked, her tone still cool, but no longer cutting. Motel in Clearwater for now. Until the money runs out, anyway. Savannah nodded, thinking. I won't give you money, she said finally. But I can help you navigate the medical system. There are programs, support services. Wesley's sister Beth works at the hospital in Glendale. She can point us in the right direction. Relief flooded Richard's face. Thank you, Savannah. I don't deserve. No, you don't, she agreed, cutting him off again. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for me. For the girl who once adored her father. And for the woman who refuses to let bitterness define her the way it defined you. Richard nodded slowly, acceptance in his tired eyes. And Dad, Savannah added, her voice firm. This doesn't mean I forgive you. It doesn't mean we go back to being father and daughter like nothing happened. That relationship is gone. If you want any kind of relationship with me now, you'll have to build it from scratch, just like I had to rebuild my life. I understand, Richard said softly. Wesley reappeared in the doorway, sensing the conversation had reached a turning point. You're welcome to stay for lunch, he offered. June will be home from school soon. She might like to meet her grandfather. Richard looked up in surprise. I have a granddaughter. Stepdaughter, Savannah clarified. But yes, you do. Whether you get to know her depends entirely on whether you can be the kind of grandfather she deserves. Reliable, supportive, present. For the first time, genuine emotion broke through Richard's guarded expression. I'd like the chance to try, he said, a tear tracking down his weathered cheek. To do better this time around. Savannah didn't rush to comfort him or to offer easy absolution. Instead, she pulled out a chair and sat across from him, her posture straight, her gaze direct. Then that's where we start, she said, her voice neither warm nor cold, but measured, intentional. The voice of a woman who had learned the hard way that some things, once broken, could never be fully repaired, but could perhaps be rebuilt into something different, something that acknowledged both the damage and the possibility of growth. Outside, the Colorado wind rustled through fields that had once been barren but now flourished under careful stewardship. Like the land itself, Savannah had endured seasons of abandonment and harshness, only to emerge stronger, more resilient, capable of setting boundaries while still offering measured grace. Not for her father's sake, but for her own. 7 years after Savannah's arrival at the derelict ranch, the Moore Parker property had transformed into a beacon of rural innovation and renewal. The main house, once dilapidated and unwelcoming, now stood proudly renovated, its wraparound porch adorned with hanging baskets of native wildflowers. A new sign at the entrance read, "Prairie Threads Ranch. Wool, Workshops, Wisdom." On a brilliant late May morning, Savannah stood in the converted barn that now served as a community workshop space. Sunlight streamed through the clear-story windows, illuminating a circle of women seated at spinning wheels and looms. Their faces reflected the diversity of rural Colorado: weathered farm wives, young mothers with babies strapped to their backs, college students interested in sustainable textiles, and several older women from neighboring towns. "Remember, the tension needs to be consistent," Savannah instructed, moving around the circle to adjust a novice spinner's technique. "Your hands will develop the memory with practice." From the doorway, Wesley watched with quiet pride, his arm draped casually around June's shoulders. At 14, their daughter had grown tall and confident, her copper braids replaced by a practical ponytail, her freckled face serious as she observed the workshop. "I think Mrs. Erickson needs help with her bobbin," June murmured to her father before slipping away to assist an elderly participant. Wesley made his way to Savannah's side as she finished demonstrating applying technique. "The reporter from the agricultural magazine is here," he said softly. "Ready whenever you are." Savannah nodded, tucking a strand of honey blonde hair, now threaded with occasional silver, behind her ear. "Ladies, let's take a 15-minute break," she announced. "Eleanor has kindly brought her famous lavender shortbread cookies to share." As the group dispersed to the refreshment table, Savannah led the way to the small office she and Wesley shared at the rear of the barn. A young woman waited there, recorder and notebook at the ready. "Ms. Moore Parker? I'm Diane Keeling from Modern Homesteading Monthly." She introduced herself, extending her hand. "Thank you for making time for this interview. Your program has generated quite a buzz in sustainable agriculture circles." "Please, call me Savannah," she replied, gesturing for the reporter to take a seat. "And this is my husband, Wesley. The ranch is very much a partnership." "Tell me about Prairie Threads," Diane began. "How did you go from a single woman with, according to local legend, just 4 sheep, to running one of the most successful women's agricultural empowerment programs in the state?" Savannah exchanged a glance with Wesley, their shared history flowing between them in that brief look. "Necessity was certainly the mother of invention," she said with a small smile. "I found myself alone on this ranch with minimal resources and had to figure things out quickly. Those first 4 sheep," Wesley added, "became the foundation of everything." Savannah saw possibility where others would have seen only limitation. The reporter nodded, taking notes. "And the education center aspect? How did that develop?" "Organically," Savannah explained. "I benefited enormously from community knowledge, from the library, from neighbors, from people willing to share their expertise. As our ranch became more established, it felt natural to create a space where that kind of knowledge sharing could happen systematically. Our focus on women specifically came later," Wesley continued. "We noticed that at agricultural workshops and conferences, women often hesitated to ask questions or take the lead, despite being integral to their family operations. Rural women carry so much responsibility," Savannah elaborated, passion evident in her voice. "Yet they often lack access to training specifically designed for their needs and situations. We wanted to change that." "And how many women have completed your program so far?" Diane asked. "Over 200 through our intensive 3-month residential fellowship," Savannah answered with pride. "And nearly 1,000 have participated in weekend workshops covering everything from fiber arts to financial planning for small farms." As the interview continued, Shadow, now a dignified senior dog with graying muzzle but still sharp eyes, padded into the office and settled at Savannah's feet with a contented sigh. "He was my first partner here," Savannah explained, reaching down to stroke the border collie's head. "I'm not sure I would have made it without him." After finishing the interview and showing Diane around the property, the expanded sheep barns, the dye garden where they grew plants for natural colorants, the small cabins where fellowship participants stayed during their training, Savannah found herself momentarily alone on the porch steps. The late afternoon sun gilded the landscape, turning the pastures golden and highlighting the snow-capped mountains in the distance. From within the workshop barn came the sounds of laughter and conversation as the women packed up their projects. Near the garden, June was demonstrating proper sheep shearing technique to an attentive group of younger girls, her movements confident and precise. Wesley appeared beside Savannah, settling onto the step with a comfortable familiarity. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "Just reflecting," she replied, leaning slightly against his shoulder. "On how differently things turned out than I expected." "Regrets?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Savannah shook her head. "Not one. Even the hard parts led here." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching as June finished her demonstration to enthusiastic applause from her young audience. "Did I tell you what she said last night?" Wesley asked, after she finished her biology homework. "What's that?" "She announced that after college, she wants to come back here. Expand the program to include veterinary training specifically for women interested in large animal practice." Wesley's voice held a mixture of amusement and pride. "She has it all mapped out, complete with budget projections." "She is definitely your daughter," Savannah laughed. "All that practical planning." "With your determination," Wesley countered, taking her hand in his. From the driveway came the sound of a car engine. They both looked up to see a modest sedan approaching, driven by Harriet from the library. In the passenger seat sat Richard Moore, thinner than he had been 4 years ago when he'd first reappeared in Savannah's life, but looking more at peace than she could remember seeing him since before her mother's death. Against the odds, her father had survived his cancer diagnosis, though the treatment had taken a toll. Their relationship had been rebuilt slowly, painfully at times, not as father and daughter in the traditional sense, but as two adults finding a new way to connect. Richard volunteered at the ranch twice a week, his carpentry skills proving valuable in maintaining the infrastructure. More importantly, he had become a steady presence in June's life. A grandfather who showed up for school concerts and 4-H competitions, who taught her to carve wood and fix engines, who was determined to be the man his granddaughter deserved. "Right on time for dinner," Wesley observed, standing and offering Savannah his hand. As they walked down to greet the arrivals, June bounded over from the garden, Shadow trotting faithfully at her heels. "Grandpa," she called, waving enthusiastically. "Wait until you see the new spinning wheel Mr. Torres built for the workshop. It's beautiful." Richard's face lit up at the sight of his granddaughter. The bitter lines that had once dominated his expression softened by years of humble redemption. Savannah felt a familiar fullness in her heart as she surveyed the gathering. Her unconventional family, the women from the workshop who were finding their own paths to independence and fulfillment, the land that had evolved from a punishment into a blessing. What had begun as an act of cruelty had, through persistence and community and love, transformed into a legacy of hope. Later that evening, after the workshop participants had departed and dinner had been cleared away, Savannah found herself alone in the yard with June. The teenager was brushing Winston's descendant, a stately ram they'd named Phoenix, her movements gentle but assured. "Mom," June said, using the name she'd adopted for Savannah shortly after the wedding. "I've been thinking about something." "What's that, sweetheart?" Savannah asked, recognizing the serious tone in her daughter's voice. "The Legacy program we're starting this summer, where each graduate gets 2 ewes to start their own flock." June looked up, her eyes reflective in the fading light. "I think we should name it after your first 4 sheep. The Marigold Pepper Daisy Winston Foundation. Because that's where it all began, right? With what you had, not what you didn't have." Savannah felt her throat tighten with emotion. That's perfect, June." The girl nodded decisively. "I want to carry it forward someday. All of this." She gestured to encompass the ranch, the programs, the community they'd built. "I want to make sure other women have the chance to figure it out, like you did." As the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight, Savannah wrapped her arm around her daughter's shoulders, remembering the broken woman who had once knelt in the dust, sobbing at her father's cruel parting words. That pain hadn't disappeared. It had been transformed, channeled into purpose and compassion. The inheritance that had seemed so meager had, with time and tenacity, yielded abundance beyond measure. Figure it out, her father had said, intending it as a dismissal. Instead, it had become an invitation to create something extraordinary. Together, Savannah said softly to June, her voice carrying the weight of promise and possibility. We'll figure it out together. Above them, the vast Colorado sky spread like a canopy of dreams, stars illuminating a path forward that continued to unfold. One step, one day, one life changed at a time. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and if you've watched this far, comment, "I watched all the way through," and share your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears in the end screen. It's very exciting.